Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. In 1973, the U.S. Congress designated August 26 as Women's Equality Day. This day commemorates the 1920 adoption of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which granted women the right to vote. 50 years later, Women's Equality Day continues to highlight and promote efforts towards full equality for women and an end to discrimination on the basis of sex. We celebrate this historic commemoration with an insightful and inspiring panel discussion moderated by Sharnessa L. Ridley, the Deputy Director of the Council for Women and Youth Involvement, CFYI. Ridley will be joined by panelists Xavi Carneiro, Executive Director at North Carolina Asian American Together, or NCAAT, Anaja McClinton, Youth Development Program Coordinator at the Council for Women and Youth Involvement, Beth Posner, Clinical Professor of Law and Director of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Clinic at UNC School of Law, and Shanika Weeks, a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the town of Chapel Hill, to discuss breaking barriers and building bridges, celebrating women's achievement and advancing gender equality. Before we go further into today's program, I would like to do some housekeeping. For attendance purposes, please clearly display your name and agency or university. As always, keep your microphones on mute throughout the entire session. Please send all of your questions to the chat room. The chat room will be monitored and we will work to make sure all of your questions are answered in an orderly fashion. This session will be recorded and you will be able to view this program later on demand. Speaking of on-demand recordings, you will be notified soon of this program's availability and all of our recent programs as they will when they are ready to be viewed. We will also have programming coming up this fall, and we will announce those dates coming very soon. I have the pleasure of introducing today's panelists, Sharnessa L. Ridley. Sharnessa has been with the Department of Administration since 2021, when she became Deputy Director of the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement. In this capacity, she plays a vital role in supporting the work of the division. CFWYI provides grant funding to domestic violence and sexual assault programs that provide critical services such as counseling, shelter, and advocacy for survivors. The division also runs 3 programs aimed at getting youth from high schoolers to college students involved in local or state government. Sharnessa has held different positions across North Carolina in a career spanning well over a decade in the field of victim services. She began her career in 2007 as a rape victim court advocate for Real Crisis Intervention Incorporated, a standalone rape crisis agency that served the counties of Pitt, Beaufort, Martin, and Washington. Real Crisis Center advocates also answer the National Suicide Hotlines. From 2013 to 2020, she's worked at the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault as Director of Training and Communications. Before joining the DOA and the CFWYI, she was Associate Director of the Campus Violence Response Center at UNC Greensboro. She has also worked as a consultant for various organizations nationwide, including USA Gymnastics, all committed to trauma-informed practices and restorative responses to harm. Sharnessa holds a BS in Criminal Justice from Elizabeth City State University, an executive MPA from North Carolina Central University, and has served as president of the North Carolina Women United for multiple terms. And she is a very proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I will now turn the program over to our guest moderator, Sharnessa Ridley. Sharnessa?
Hi, Wendy.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to be here. It's been such a delight to work with and collaborate with OSHR for this event. You and Regina have been such fantastic partners to work with. So thank you all for the invitation and the support that you have provided leading up to the day. It's been much appreciated. So, welcome to everyone attending, and thank you so much for tuning in for today's event. Every day is the right day to honor and empower women, but each year, specifically on August 26th, Women's Equality Day is celebrated. This day commemorates the 19th Amendment being adopted in the U.S. in the 1920s. In 1971, U.S. Congress officially recognized August 26 as Women's Equality Day. This day marks the turning point in the history of the struggle for equal treatment of women and women's rights. We should all be reminded that gender equality is a human right. It prevents violence against women and girls, and as someone whose life's work has been in the anti-gender-based violence field, that means a lot to me. So in planning for this event, one of the things I thought a lot about was what the day means to me. And during that reflection, I found myself wrestling a lot with the history of the movement. The reality is that on this day that we recognize voting rights were no longer separated by gender. And we need to name that that's a very monumental win that absolutely changed the quality of life for generations. But the underside of that celebration sits the intersection of race and gender. The reality is Asian women, Indigenous women, Latinx women, and Black and Brown women who look like me, those who were on the front lines as co-conspirators in the suffrage movement, did not fully have those rights until much later. So when I think about this day and what it means, I know, and I stand here in my truth to say, like, I know that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? This day calls attention to women's continuing efforts towards full equality. And in order to do that, we must absolutely maintain an intersectional commitment to view things through their impact, to view things and their impact through more than just a single identity. So I am honored to moderate today's panel with these uniquely different and equally amazing women. I am joined today by Anaja McClinton, who is the Youth Involvement Program Coordinator for the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement. Professor Beth Posner, Clinical Professor of Law and Director of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Violence Clinic at UNC School of Law, and Ms. Shanika Weeks, who is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the town of Chapel Hill. Unfortunately, Shavi Canero was not able to join us this morning, but we are sending her all the good energy in hopes that she feels better soon. So to kick things off, I want to turn it over to you all, ladies. Please tell us more about who you are, the work that you do, and what Women's Equality Day means or represents for you. So to those attending, first you're going to hear from Anaja, followed by Professor Posner, and the last voice you'll be hearing from will be Ms. Weeks. So Anaja, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Anaja McClinton, and I work for the Council for Women and Youth Involvement as the Youth Programs Coordinator. I oversee 3 programs which spans over the state of North Carolina, which is the State of North Carolina Internship Program, State Youth Council, and the Lady Cardinal Mentorship Program. And what Women's Equality Day means to me is, I want to be positive and say, it's a great day to have a day to recognize women and represent women, but it's also, you have to think about all the history that we have been through and think about how we still don't have actual equality because we still don't make as much as men. We still don't have all the same equality as they do, but we are slowly but surely, hopefully, going to get there one day. And I'm glad to be a woman, and I'm proud to have this day to represent as a Black woman.
I guess that makes me next. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm, again, Beth Posner. I teach at the University of North Carolina School of Law. I teach the Domestic and Sexual Violence Clinic, in which third-year law students represent survivors of domestic and sexual violence in a full range of matters, including protection order hearings, Title IX campus sexual assault matters, prison assault matters, and other kind of complicated family law and sometimes immigration and employment matters, all related to gender-based or intimate partner violence. I've been doing this work almost since I graduated from law school in 1997. I worked for what was then Legal Services of North Carolina, doing statewide domestic violence programming, working with the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and local domestic violence agencies and attorneys all over the state. I also teach with the American Bar Association, supporting lawyers all over the country who do similar types of work. Love my job and love the students that I get to teach. Hate that I have to have this job and that this job still exists and is needed on such a high level. Really no less a level than it was needed when I started practicing law in 1997. And certainly I wouldn't say any less than was needed when the 19th Amendment was passed. So for me, Women's Equality Day, also would like to say stay positive. I'm very much woman identified, and feel very strongly about a career that has centered almost solely on women's rights and women's equality. So every day for me is Women's Equality Day. Every day for me is a day that we're striving to make the world a better place for women and girls in particular, but also for women, for anyone who identifies as a woman and girls, but also recognizing that there is a lack of access to justice, lack of services, now lack of access to bodily integrity for women, and even more so for women of color, Indigenous women, disabled women. And so very much kind of continually concerned about the lack of progress. I'm happy to be here on this day. I know I'm not supposed to be dour. What makes this day special, though, is that we do come together as women to talk about these issues. And so for me, that's always a win. Anytime that you can get an audience together, or a group of women or a group of people together to talk about women's equality, is a great day. So whether we're achieving or not achieving, if we're talking about it, we are at least moving the needle in some way. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. My name is Shanika Weeks. I'm a cisgender Black woman, pronouns she, her, hers. Was born in the city, raised in the South. My ancestors are traced back to Nigeria, the Igbo tribe. I'm a sister, a daughter, an aunt, currently the DEI officer for the town of Chapel Hill. I also serve as the EEO officer as well. I have about 20 years experience in local government, from law enforcement, human services, child advocacy, and also work within the educational system. For me, Women's Equality Day, especially as a Black woman, right, socialized in the South, means that I have the opportunity to show up and help communities, as opposed to being the help, right? I understand the context of America and where I would be without women's equality. I come from a long line of hardworking women. And because of this work, I can walk out my mom's dream for us, right? I can choose to do work that feeds my soul as well as my family. This work that I do within the town of Chapel Hill, and basically all of my career has been centered around helping people to do what it is that they need to do, right? To figure out what it is that they need to figure out. And in the process, I realized that the systemic level change that needs to happen really can be like summed up in this DEI work. So I'm super excited to be here day to day. That looks like helping the organization really normalize conversations around race. We lead with race, but we're not race exclusive. We are explicit about that, but we're not just exclusive. And so it brings in all these other intersectionalities as we approach that work. We're thinking through what infrastructure needs to be involved, what systems, what people, what groups need to be involved, and then also looking at things through an equity lens, right? So working with our town staff to understand what that equity lens looks like, where our blind spots are, how we can improve outcomes for people in the community, but also for the employees who work for the town of Chapel Hill. Feel very fortunate. I have women in leadership positions. I look around the manager's office. Our mayor, Mayor Pam Heminger, is a woman. And so I've been fortunate enough in many of the work, the fields that I've been in, to have women in leadership positions, but I also know that there are women beside me who don't have that experience, right? Who don't have that opportunity to learn from and glean from the ways in which, you know, maybe old school, we've had to purport ourselves to get into the position, but then to see women really coming in, representing themselves, full selves, right? And so I take every opportunity to show up, sometimes as a 75-year-old Black woman embodying my mom, right? Or an 80-year-old person embodying my late grandmother, to do this work, because it takes all of that to make it happen. Super excited to be here with you all today. And again, you know, this work for me means that I have the opportunity to admire women across the spectrum, from, you know, the culinary champions in my home church to the domestic project managers who are keeping everything together for their families. But then also to be able to look at the top reins of our government and see a vice president, right, who looks like me. And so while there are things going on right now, with our major decision makers that seem contrary to the work that's been done, we always understand that there's always opportunity and there's always oppression, right? And so we stay in this work, and we do this work because we need to, because someone did it before us. And so, you know, Women's Equality Day is just, you know, forward march, right?
Thank you so much for those introductions, ladies. So the title of this event is Breaking Barriers and Building Bridges, Celebrating Women's Achievements and Advancing Gender Equality. So based on your lived experience, a lot that you've already shared with us now, personally and professionally, can you talk about the wins for women in your field of expertise, or just the movement more broadly, which we should celebrate? And who wants to take that one first?
I can start if you'd like. I thought a little bit about this, and I realized that there's one kind of consistent theme throughout the work that I've been doing, starting with domestic violence and then moving into campus-based violence, and now working in reproductive justice as well. And that is the kind of grassroots movements that started these movements, that started the discussion. And it really was kind of a matter of women telling their stories, right? The battered women's and children's movement, people telling their stories to each other that shed a light on family-based violence, on intimate partner violence, on child abuse, and on domestic violence. And that groundswell, what we called the battered women's movement at the time, you know, changed laws all over this country. It took longer in some states like North Carolina, but every state in this country, it is now illegal to beat your spouse. It is now illegal to rape your spouse. That's a huge win. And that really was because women told each other stories. Similarly, the Title IX movement is the same, right? These remarkable women who were victims of rape on their own college campuses, places where they should have felt safe, where they should have been able to learn equally amongst their peers, realized that this was not just them, that this was a large portion of women on college campuses who were being sexually assaulted. They came together, they told their stories loudly, boldly to each other, and then to governments, and laws changed and attitudes changed. And now people are telling their abortion stories, right? And you know, things are not changing, but people are angry and helping each other and figuring out ways to get people access to reproductive rights, reproductive needs, because people are telling stories. So, you know, and as lawyers, that's what we do, right? We help people who can't otherwise tell their stories, tell stories. So for me, the wins are that. The wins are lifting up the voices of people who otherwise don't have their voices told, or folks coming together and telling their stories together to push forward an agenda that is essential for women's equality. That's for me the common theme.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add?
Sure, I can jump in there. So I kind of think about my work starting like really formally with law enforcement, right? I was the only Black woman officer within the department in Harnett County. There were about 10 people of color that were there, and it was very interesting. I would tell people I worked at the sheriff's office, and immediately they would ask, "Do you work in the jail?" And no, I'm an officer. Oh, I would always get, right? Like this thought process, like, oh, women can't be law enforcement officers. So now here we are, you know, some 20 some odd years later, town of Chapel Hill, we have our first women police chief, right? Chief Salisa Lehue, who's amazing, and the work that they're doing, really thinking about wanting 30% of the police recruitment class by the year of 2030 to be women, right? So just pushing that along, and that's a long way from where this work started, or working with young people who were abused and neglected through the court system as a child advocate, working through the Guardian Ad Litem program, right? Looking at that arena and thinking through really what drove our family out of New York, substance abuse, and the way in which crack cocaine really had taken over in New York, to then again, you know, 20, 30 years later, to see the ways in which that system has evolved, no longer separating newborns from mothers who were in recovery. The system had, you know, expanded to this really, this space of understanding those bonds are deeper than the punitive nature of substance abuse, right? And so that was a major change that we've seen in that process. Thinking through this work, I have on red, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta, right? So in, you know, March the 3rd, we were marching alongside women who were fighting for the right to vote, right? That women's suffrage procession in DC, even though, you know, the members of the organization realized that they were not fighting for their rights particularly, right? Knowing that Black women were not on the table at that point in time, but that they understood the connection, right? That intersectionality that I'll continue to kind of bring up, that really speaks through this work. Historically, we kind of think about this work of DEI, and I was very shocked to understand this and learn this, but I don't know why I was shocked. The majority of the people who were in DEI roles historically were men, white men, but we see that trend really changing, right? To include more inclusive identities. Those positions are browning, and women are certainly leading the way. So I think about the group of folks who are doing this work locally in the Triangle area. The majority of my colleagues are women. Many of them are Black women who are in this space. I think about the work that I do, what leads me, what drives me. And I ran across a theory. It's a self-determination theory. Anyone knows any of the self-help gurus, that work really centered on Deci and Ryan's work, right? Thinking through ways in which people have more autonomy, right? Women deserve autonomy over their lives, right? Belonging. They need the ability to be able to advocate, right, for their place at the table. And then competence, the ability to master their environment. And so throughout my personal life and my work life, what I've seen and witnessed is women doing this in amazing ways, right? Owning who they are, having autonomy, belonging, and creating space at tables, not only for themselves, but other folks, right? Leading the way and opening. I think about myself. My name is Shanika, right? So, you know, I'm a brown girl, just about almost by name, right? So being able to walk into a space and give folks permission to be who they are in that space, right? To bring my full self into that space, to not shave off the pieces that even as a child, maybe there was some, you know, imposter kind of complex going on, and I was like, oh, I don't want people to know that piece of me. But all of those pieces, even the traumatic parts, right, are what bring me to this space, and hopefully make me effective in building relationships and pushing this work forward. So just across the spectrum, we've seen it. We've seen women's rights really improve, and again, that leadership, right, that mentorship, the ability to have someone you know, bring you into the fold and share what they know with you so that you can do all that you can do.
I'm going to piggyback off of all the great things that Shanika has said. So within my department, so I work with the Lady Cardinal Mentorship Program, and that program was brought in 2019 by Secretary Michelle Sanders, who is a Black woman. She's a Black woman in power in state government. And the program is for high school girls that are interested in STEM, and it came from the Status of Women report, where basically saying that women will not make the same amount as men until 2060. It's only 2023. So having and knowing that this is a program that brings in young women to see that there's more to state government than what people think it is, and is more to state government as part of STEM, because in a lot of these STEM professions is men. And it's like you don't see a lot of women. And to have a lot of women come in to see like what all that they could do and have that experience is very empowering to be able to run that program and show these young ladies all that state government has to offer. and just show them everything that the world has to offer in general. Um, and piggybacking off of what Shanika said about, there is a Black woman in power and she's our vice president. So it shows us that there is someone, that anything is possible, no matter what you look at. And there's so many things that women have gone through and so many barriers that we have broken down, as far as like, like Beth said, as far as DEI, women for your body, and more different things. It's just like the things that we have gone through as women, and having to. And I grew up with a whole bunch of strong women around me, so it's like I had no choice but to be that woman that can stand up and make sure that I do what I have to do every day to face every adversity against me and not back down from it. So being a woman of color and just seeing all the great things that women have done over the years gives me the strength and power to know that I can do that anything is possible if I put my mind to it.
Thank you so much. Every time I hear you all speak, I'm so excited that you said yes to this. So thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so our second question, we just talked about some success stories, but we all know that there are many more things that need to take place in order for women and girls to achieve full equality and have greater success. So this is a two-part question, right? So number one is based on your lived experience or your understanding of the status of women, what would you identify as present barriers to achievement and equality? And the second part of that question is what or who could reduce or eliminate those barriers? And I will again make that an open question for whoever wants to jump in first.
They were slow on the draw. I'll get myself off of mute for that one. For me, one of the largest, just outsized barriers is really socialization, right? So I kind of think about, sit like a woman, sit upright, right? Even down to this morning as I was getting ready, right? Thinking about how I was going to put my makeup on and make sure that I am, cute and dolled up for this moment. And even the word dolled up, right? So there's so much that we have to unpack to kind of show up into these spaces in a particular way. But I kind of go back to the things that we could do to kind of change those barriers. I think about the men in my family up until the point in time that I became a law enforcement officer. Oftentimes they would repeat some of this stuff. They were active agents of socialization for me, right? God rest my father. So I remember the first time I was on the phone with a boy, right? And he was like, wait, you're on the phone with a boy? Hang up. If you like boys, you need to start cooking. And that began like my cooking lessons, right? But I also know that when I became a law enforcement officer, the pride that my father had, the ways in which he never tried to talk me out of it. He always talked about, ways to keep myself safe. Same thing with like the uncles in my family, how proud they were that I was in law enforcement. And so it's that personal connection, I think. It's that socialization, but then also when opportunity is there, how the folks around you support and rally to push you forward, right? And not kind of, knock you down or tear you down a bit. I kind of also think about some internalized oppression, right? I mean, today's Thursday, excuse me, Sunday, I was at church, and the internalized oppression that we hold for ourselves, right? For women. There was someone at church and their back was out. And I was like, and I caught myself in that moment. What difference does it make? I had to unlearn that socialization about how we police women's bodies, right? So we do that sometimes ourselves. And so when I think about, like this table of oppression, of women's oppression, everyone, right, needs to get a leg of that table if we're going to dismantle that, right? And some of that is on the part of women. Some of that certainly is on the part of people who identify as men, and folks who in terms of the transgender community and LGBTQ plus, right? Everyone has a role to play in this work, and how we dismantle the system of oppression towards women. And it really is about relationship, and it really is about support, in my opinion.
So I can kind of piggyback off of that. I think that Shanika was very lucky to have had men in her lives who valued her, right, and valued the work that she did. I think that we live in and mostly in a culture that does not value women, right? Does not value women's work, does not value women's bodies, does not value the way women take up space. And we see that more and more. And I mean, if you watched the debate last night, you kind of see that that's just kind of the status quo for some people. That's just the assumption that we will not have bodily integrity, that we will not have equal pay for equal work, you know, all of these things. I think about this, one of my favorite quotes that has to do with the work that I do. And when I think about women's work, is a Toni Morrison quote that I have on the door of my office. It says, and it's for students. She said, "I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you've so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game." And for me, that is our job, right? So, you know, we have a lot of privilege, you know, the four of us in different ways, right? And we have education, we have jobs, we have this screen and this space for people to listen to us. But most women do not have this. And women who do not look like me, women who look like you, trans women also, you know, have even less space and face even more violence, right? And so when there are women like us who have the opportunity, we have to kind of grab back in and pull whoever we can along with us. And we have to, you know, as Shanika said, like, tell ourselves different stories, like block out the narrative that allows us to police other people, and block out the narrative that comes from outside that also separates us from each other, right? That makes, you know, some people think they're better than others, deserve more than others, unable to acknowledge or look at their privilege. That we have a responsibility from wherever space we are to look around and see who is not getting this space, who's not getting the chance to tell their story, who's being hit harder than I am, and what can I do to make that change. But I will say that the problem really is that women in general are not valued, and that the dominant force has done a very good job of dividing us, and dividing us along race lines, around gender expression lines, around sexuality, around ability. And so that there's like a little piece of the pie, and, you know, that we're trying to get, and we're ready to push everybody else away. So we need to kind of remember that piece of it. We have been divided as women, and it was a very smart move for the dominant culture to do that. We need to remember that we've been divided and come back together and support one another.
Thank you. Yeah, those harmful narratives are so extremely deadly, right? I mean, when you all were talking, I'm thinking about standing in rooms with other victim advocates, and you basically just gave like a rape culture 101 training just now, right? Like, what are the ideas that we learn, that we are committed to believing, sometimes subconsciously? It's a false positive because we believe those things because we think this is how it keeps us safe. But the reality of it is, that's also why when survivors are assaulted, they're not believed, right? Because someone has said that you should have avoided these other things, and had you avoided that, right? Had you dressed differently, looked differently, not showed up this way, that thing wouldn't happen. We all know that's not the case. So yeah, those narratives are really, really harmful. So thanks for lifting that up. Anaja, before we move to the next question, I do want to give you a chance to speak if you had anything you wanted to add.
I did. I wanted to add that, you know, there's a barrier with women in power. It's more looked at as intimidation more than just, you know, this is something prideful that you should be very proud of, but it's more like, oh, she's in power, so she's gonna be this person, she's gonna be like this, she's gonna be like that. And it's just like, it's always like a negative to a lot of people because they don't trust women in power. And not knowing that we can do the same things that men have done over the years. And also, you know, the narrative of, like you said, the sexual assault narrative is just like, what constitutes being ladylike? Yes, you can act like a lady, but what does that actually mean? What does that actually do for somebody? It's just like, just because I act a certain way, am I not acting like a lady because I like to do such things as the boys do? Or do I like to, oh, I want to wear this instead of wearing this? How does that constitute me being a lady? I'm still a woman. I can still, carry myself any the way that I want to. That doesn't negate the fact that I'm a strong, powerful woman just because I decide to do things a certain way that society does not always agree with. And that's okay. But I do believe that us as women should really empower each other and get, like everyone said, to take away that narrative of this isn't ladylike, this isn't okay, this isn't acceptable, because all of it is, because that's how we choose to live.
Mhm. I like that lifting up the point about ladylike, and regardless of how that thing is defined, regardless of the way that you check certain boxes or don't check certain boxes, the autonomy looks like, despite the boxes that you check, you should really be able to live a life that is free from harm, right? So yeah, thank you so much for that point, Anaja. So hearing so much about all the ways that we still need progress, right, can make it really hard to keep going. But we're here today, we're still showing up, and we're still trying. I want to hear from you all. Why do you still show up? Who or what sustains you to do this work for the long haul?
Um, so what sustains me to do the work for the long haul is for the little girls that look like me. I have a little cousin who thinks that I hung the moon and I hung all the stars and everything because she just thinks that I have done everything possible that is great. So like having those people that look like me and know that they look up to me and to just keep doing the work that I do to make a difference in my communities all over North Carolina and maybe even the world one day, because there is people that I have to pave the way for, and they may not, and that I can always create the opportunities that they can have in the future, because my parents didn't have that opportunity or my grandparents didn't have the opportunity. But for me to have the opportunity, I can always make the opportunity possible for those coming after me. So that's what keeps me sustained, and also just knowing that anything is always possible, no matter what it is, as long as you put your mind to it, anything is possible.
Beth and I are kind of doing this, like, let me look at you. Are you ready? Are you going to go type of thing? So for me, I kind of think about how I show up. I really try to do this work differently. I recall days of like walking into work at the Guardian Ad Litem program, trying to figure out if I needed to straighten my hair to get the job or to not, or thinking about the TV shows that I watched or the songs that I watch. I recall like icebreakers. And you're trying to say something oftentimes that fits in with the group, right? But at this point in time, tell me what kind of music. Rap. I like Wu-Tang, Ghostface, to be exact, right? I can name that, and this just showing up as I am and giving other people permission to do the same, right? There's so much that goes along with that. But then also thinking about this work, I moved from St. Louis like right before the pandemic. I intended to go back to the Guardian Ad Litem program to do that good work, advocating for young people, giving them a voice in court. And then, we all watched George Floyd, right, get murdered on TV. And it was like, I can't do this, right? I cannot stay in this space. I need to get back to this DEI space, right? So I'm in Surrey and Stokes County doing good work with the great people there. But I realized I kind of needed to get back into the work, right? I couldn't be like on Facebook trying to teach lessons about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I kind of had to get back into that work and just showing up, doing what I know to do, encouraging other people, giving folks voice. Especially in the government realm, right? Government, we have the opportunity to give out resources, to hoard resources, right? To gatekeep, right? So how can I not do those things in this space? How can I really help access for people in this space? And that means showing up in community, right? That means getting to know folks. That means the Saturdays or the evenings, right? That you have to show up to make and avail yourself in the community, to understand what's going on with folks, what they need to do, and really getting to know the folks who did this work beforehand. Thinking about my work in the context of Chapel Hill, there's a group of women that meet at the library, the Women of the Movement, right? So rich group of 28 women who talk about how, the civil rights movement They really worked through from the healthcare system to education, ways that they were fighting for equality for their families, for women, for anyone that's oppressed. So just really learning is like sitting at their feet, right, and learning that information and being able to carry that information forward. So that kind of helped sustain me, knowing that people did this work in far more dangerous conditions, right? Like I think it was last year, it was MLK holiday, and as I was doing my speech for that, I said, "Oh, I get the privilege to do this really awesome, hard, heavy lift, and I don't worry about getting like shot going into work." Like right there is a way that I do this work that it was not this way, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so I'm privileged by that, but I also really, really think about how do I sustain myself in this work? And I'll go back to something I said earlier. There's opportunity and then there's oppression, right? So being into that space, taking that opportunity, expanding opportunities, and then looking for that oppression, right? And calling it out, being really clear about the ways that I do that. Being a Black woman, 5'7", got a little meat on me, a little thick in the space. And so people can automatically see that and say, strong Black woman, right? You're strong. And I am. But I don't want that to be the trope of a strong Black woman, right? So there's a piece of me that shows up as I am, right? Gregarious, friendly, liking to laugh and joke. And that's kind of sort of the way I show up in this work, because I want to be approachable. But also I have something to say, right? And I need you all to hear this and feel this. And I need us to do some things about this. But there's a way that you can show up and just be yourself and not worry about, all of those things that people may or may not say about you. Essential oils are my thing. I kind of give grace to myself and others, right? This isn't linear work. Like I said, I was sitting in church Sunday and had to check myself, kind of making space for joy and pleasure, right? Understanding my purpose, understanding my strength, and just moving towards that, knowing that I have a grandmother who would not have believed that I was a police officer. She unfortunately passed before I was sworn in, but she would have not believed it, right? Again, a mother who worked 2 and 3 jobs to make sure that we had an opportunity to go to school, right? So there are people, I stand on shoulders, right, of women, and I can't let them down and they won't let me fall, right? And so that's what sustains me in this work.
Wow, that was so inspiring. I don't even know where to go from here. Um, I will say that I kind of when people ask me what I do and I say that what do you teach? What's your area of law? And I say domestic and sexual violence. They say, oh, that must be so hard. How do you not get burned out? And, I talk to my students about burnout and how you don't get burned out. And, I think there are 2 pieces to that. I mean, I've been doing it a long time. Obviously, I'm not burned out, right? I'm still here. There's first they're the people who inspired me and mentored me in the beginning that got me to this place, right? And not wanting to let those people down is significant for me. I went to a women's college. I was educated with very strong women who I stay in touch with. And then I had these kind of great mentors at Legal Services of North Carolina, at the law school when I went to law school. And that's important for me. But then something happened. All of a sudden, I became older than those people were when they were mentoring me. And I guess in some way became a mentor also. And so there are 2 things that sustain me now, and that is my students and our clients. I mean, in the work, seeing these students who are so much smarter than I was when I was in law school, like who really get it right away, who kind of look at our domestic violence work and see that there's poverty and misogyny and race, like all wrapped up together, and like understand how those things come together and are important to address when you're dealing with violence against women in the world. Like they see that already. It's sustaining to see that, to be inspired by young people who are going to go out and do this work way better than I ever did when I was setting out to do it. That sustains me. And then we have these clients, right, who have overcome the most horrific traumas in their lives that have been compounded by a lack of access to justice at its best, a lack of access. And then kind of also when they do have access to justice and to social services, indifference or even cruelty within systems, that they, want us, like, believe in us and want us to help them, and that having connection with them, I very much believe that having empathetic connections with the people you work with sustains you and keeps you moving and makes you not feel alone in the world and in the work that you do. So I feel I feel sustained by the very work that other people, I think would burn you out. Because if you lean 100% in, then you feel so good about what you're doing. So the work sustains me. And then I have 3 daughters. So I have no choice but to kind of put one foot in front of the other because I'm responsible for them. They're young adult women. And that is very sustaining. I'm a Jewish woman. I have a synagogue. I wouldn't call a faith community in the same way that I think that kind of going to church as a faith community, it's more of kind of like a cultural community, although it's a religious community. That community holds me up and sustains me. But if you were to, I think there are some participants here who know me either in other worlds, they would say, I surround myself with women, whether it be at work, with my colleagues, with my clients, with my kids, in my social life. I surround myself with women and make sure there's always someone to hold me up when I can't hold myself up anymore. And so there's like the substance of what I do and then like the life that I do, and they're connected in a lot of ways. I rely on women in a way that I hope that women feel like they can rely on me and rely on my students and other lawyers who do the work that we do.
Thanks so much for that. I resonate so much with everything that's been said. Anaja, like you, my niece is my world. I love that child, and a lot of what I do is with her in mind, right? I also think about our work and how I can just see it making a difference and making a change. I will never forget the fact that my little brother's girlfriend broke up with him when I think he might have been like 2nd grade, and I'm just like, well, Jabari, what happened? I think she had called him that morning. She wanted him to tell her what to wear that day, and he didn't have an opinion. And then he got to school and she broke up, and he got home and he was like, but you told me not to talk about girls' clothing. So I see the change, right? I see it. I see the change that we're making. I also think about quotes like Ella Baker, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'm going to get it wrong, but after voting, she after suffrage movement, she made a comment about freedom, and that we can have the right to vote, but we're still not free, right? Because people need jobs, and people need food. And that's the reality, and that's the truth. I would love for us to work ourselves out of a job, right? Beth, to your point earlier, like, it's sad that I still have this job because that means that harm is still happening. But we live in a capitalist society, and we're going to continue to work as hard as we can to eradicate that. And the reality is we need people like each of you and the folks that are joining this call with this interest and investment in women to do what they can to pass the torch, to look to the left and the right, to always pull, to just make sure that we can change, plant seeds of growth. You really can see the impact of our work across the lifespan, across generations, across sexes. It definitely does change, right? So we're nearing down to our last question in today's panel, which is in 2014, We Should All Be Feminist was published. The book was a bestseller for many years, and it remains popular. The interest in this book, and so many like it, is motivated by a healthy curiosity of like-minded individuals who want to make a difference or better understand the role that they play. So regardless of the label of the person may assign themselves, such as womanist or feminist, at the core, right, it's all about action. But we got to acknowledge that many people actually get overwhelmed and do not know where to start. And so I want to ask all of you, what would you say are the entry points to advocacy and making a difference in the fight for women's equality? I love this dance that you all are doing, like, who's going to hit the button first? If this was Jeopardy, y'all's team would not win. Just want you to know that.
I mean, I will say, there's so many, it is overwhelming, right? Like but it's only overwhelming if you think about activism as being the only way, right? Because there are so many different entry points to social activism, but not everybody is a social activist, right? Not everybody's going to be a politician. Not everyone's a lawyer. Um, so, but everyone can vote. So like voting is, I think, the number one thing. Everyone can vote, and everyone should not just vote like for their self-interest, but should be looking around and like, what's the interest of the whole, right? Who needs this vote more than I do, and I should be thinking about that person. So there's of course voting. Then there's like how we raise our children, right? Like what values we pass on to our kids. So I was one of those moms. I'm working from home today, so I was one of those moms who did not allow her children to have Barbies for a very specific reason. I didn't want my kids to feel like they had to look like that. But now I've seen that Barbie movie, it's like it's more complicated than that. But wow, like there's a movie that's made billions of dollars where the word patriarchy is used over and over and over again. So like the whole world is hearing that word. It can be as simple as like going to a movie like that, or reading a book and having a discussion with your neighbors. But it's also, I have another kind of favorite quote that I am going to butcher also, an Adrienne Rich quote, that when one woman tells the truth, it creates a space for all women to tell their truths. And for me, that's not the exact quote, but that's the key, right? Tell your truth. You don't have to be an activist or politician. You don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be a teacher. But tell other people what it is like for you to be a woman, what your struggles are, and what you want to see differently, and create a space for other women to tell you their stories and listen to each other. That's easy, right? That's like just talk to your neighbor, and have your neighbor talk to their neighbor, and bring together groups of people to talk.
I just want to plug that when you tell your story, to also know that it may not be received well the first time. Keep telling it, right? And also make sure that you take care of yourself in the process, and find people that you can sit with and tell your story to, and that it will be received so that they can sustain you and give you that energy to keep it going. Very true, Beth. Thank you. Anaja, I hope you have thoughts about this.
I do. So, as Beth was speaking, I was thinking about one professor that was very, very, very important to me when I was in undergrad. She was the only Black woman professor on my PWI campus, and she created that safe space for me to tell my story to her, and to create different. She brought in a lot of different classes and courses that really gave you the opportunity to speak as a Black person on campus, and just understand the culture of an African American in a society as this. So thinking of how like you can create those safe spaces and being an advocate in that way is like an entry level way to advocacy, because if I didn't have that person on my campus, I don't know if I would have survived all 4 years, because I feel like it was so very difficult, because I feel like nobody really understood me whenever I was in class and understood my story, understood my struggle like she did. So she was a very good impact. She had a very big impact on me whenever I was through undergrad. But whenever I graduated, I was so emotional, because it's just like, you're leaving me, I'm leaving her. But like, I still keep in touch, but it's still like creating that safe space and creating that bond with women that look like you, or just women in general, can really help you in the long run. And just, just using your voice to make a difference, and using your kindness can make a difference as well.
All right, so I guess I'm bringing up the rear here on this one. You all kind of spoke to it, but sitting in community, right? So one of the ways that we can do this work, and one of the entry points, is sitting with women, right? No matter if your gender is woman or man or transgender, sitting with women, understanding, learning, listening, asking questions, right? Once the relationship is formed, right? You don't want to just start out with 21 questions, but sit in community and learn. Kind of spoke about reading. Support women-owned businesses, right? So we kind of forget that we have a level of privilege, for many of us in our jobs. We have the opportunity to kind of think through various ways that we can get into this system, this economic system. So supporting women-owned businesses, I think, is one that is certainly a thing. Unpacking your own thinking, right? Like, check yourself. That is so helpful. One of the things I kind of tell the folks in Town Chapel Hill, I'm like, listen, when we get to the point where I can say to you, I think your bias is showing, and you not get offended, we're there. Right? When we can sit in community and have that conversation, and then, you would know that bias is a real thing if you check yourself, right? Like me sitting in church Sunday, that was my bias. I had to check that thing, right? I had to kind of unpack that, get that out of my mind so that I could be more present in the space, right? And I think oftentimes when we're thinking about those pieces that kind of detract us from the work, we're not present. We're perseverating on the issue, right? Or what's wrong in the space, as opposed to looking for those opportunities to make things better. Organizations, right? The YWCA, now kind of thinking about those organizations that are doing the work of women's equality, and then also mentoring, right? So whether you're a person identifies as a woman, mentoring other young people, but then that work also goes both ways, right? So same thing with teachers. Think about the education system. Many children do well with teachers of color. And that's just not Black kids, right? That's all kids. We understand this work of equity work, equality work. We know that when we make things better for folks who are marginalized, we make things better for everyone. So it's about the ways that we raise, our girls, the ways that we raise our boys, the ways that we raise our children who are transgender. It's about what we instill in them about what's right and what's fair and who deserves it, and understanding that everyone deserves it, right? Like, all meaning all in that space. So there's lots of entry points. Take one. One of the things I try to do as a diversity, equity, inclusion officer is like really picking an identity a year to kind of dig into. Right. It's really easy for me to get on. I understand that Black thing real good, right? Like that's my first thing that comes to mind. And then for me, it's woman second, right? But then what that looks like together, but then being able to dig into that, learn more, like, Polly Murray, like, who knew there was this powerful person in Durham that had done so much, right? Thinking about the people who were local to your community, the women who paved the way, complimenting people, saying that meant something, going back to educators, right, who've made a difference in your life, to let them know the impact that they've had on your life. So there's lots of entry points. Just pick one, do it, right? Move, right? Think about that, and figure out where your areas of growth are, and continue to push forward.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, just pick one, show up, start somewhere. Everybody knows about the Me Too movement, right? And a lot of people know about that movement. Feels like it was birthed on social media. I think Rose McGowan might have tweeted it. And the true story of that movement is that Tarana Burke, who is a founder of that movement, was attending a summer camp with young Black kids. And one of the attendees at the camp disclosed her sexual assault to her. And her response to that child was, "Me Too," because that's all she had, right? And now Me Too has really just changed the trajectory of victimization for so many, right? So if we can leave you with anything, it's to be reminded to just start. If someone comes to you and they need something, you have enough. You have what you need you may not believe it, but it's there, right? I think it is, can't remember who wrote the quote, but it is, Adrienne Maree Brown. And there's a conversation that only the people in this room can have and find it. And actually the book is Emergent Strategy. If people come to you, just act, just start. We can show up for each other. I do believe that. And to do that, and once we accomplish that, that is really the path to improving more equality for all women. So I want to turn it back over to Wendy, but I want to say thank you all for attending. Thank you to these fabulous ladies for, again, giving me your yes. I humbly appreciate it, and thank you so much for that. And so I will turn it back over to you, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Sharnessa. This was definitely a very inspiring conversation that we had here today. And I'm going to open the floor now for any questions that any of our attendees may have. And I'm just looking here to see if there are any questions. So we're going to just give them just a moment to see if they have any questions, because we are coming up at the 1 o'clock hour. But if we don't have any questions, I would just like to say again that, like you said earlier, Shanessa, I don't think we could have picked a better panel for today. And all of your experiences combined has just made this into a very inspirational conversation that we should take into the rest of our days, basically. But as we bring our program to a close, I just want to thank again our guest moderator and our panelists. And I hope that this session again has inspired you to be a champion for women's equality every day. And as always, I want you to take the time to celebrate Women's Equality Day. And this program did run kind of long, but it was just so good. So we're just going to end our program today. But just again, remember that Women's Equality Day is every day. Thank you.